Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. How are you doing? It's the final session, the final day of Edge. That means we can run late. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you all for coming out and spending the week here with us at Akamai. Everyone have a good time? Excellent. Glad to hear that. So today, in our final session, we're going to talk a little bit about Cloudlets. I'll give you a brief 5-minute primer, maybe not even that, on what Cloudlets are. Then we'll talk about some common use cases, some common pain points that they've been able to solve, and some DevOps approaches to really integrate with the Cloudlets well and achieve agility and automation. By way of introduction, my name is Les Waltman, and I'm a solution engineer from Akamai. I'm based in Toronto, Canada. And my job is to really work with our customers, talk to them, understand what their business, technology, or security problems are, and then use Akamai problems to help solve those problems. And then I go to our product groups and our development groups, take our customers' feedback, take what they're telling us, and use that to shape our products. So I'm kind of the glue between our customers' needs and the products that they use. Pretty cool job. And we take our customer feedback pretty seriously because at the end of the day, it's customers' problems that we're trying to solve. And Cloudlets is a group of products that have really come out of our customer feedback. Now, when I talk to customers, I hear a lot of things. One of the most common things I hear is that people want to offload more to the edge, which makes sense. I mean, customers know that when they offload to the edge, they offload work from their origin, they get scalability, they get reliability, and the performance is better because everything that's done at the edge is done close to the end user. So it's not surprising that we want to push as much functionality to the edge as possible so it's faster and our origin has to do less. The next thing I hear commonly, and this is a common one, is if only Akamai could do, and then I hear a very obscure, specific problem that one customer is having. Now, while we can't solve all problems for all people, when you peel back the onion and look at a lot of problems that people are having, they're often common. They can be solved with common frameworks. And that's something we've tried to do with Cloudlets. And the last, I think everyone will agree with this one. Whatever you do, just make it simple, right? We all want to maximize our return on investment. We all want to put as little in as possible and get as much out as possible at the end. So making things simple really helps with that. So what if you could take work? And by work, I mean things that are done in your origin. That could be code, it could be logic, it could be capacity, and take that work and offload it to the edge. And that's what Cloudlets is really about. Now, Cloudlets are like microservices that you have in your own infrastructure, but you outsource those microservices to Akamai. Now, Cloudlets are additional product or additional modules, but just like they're microservices, they're also micro costs. So they're intended to be very modular, very small, and they're not a real money driver or a revenue driver for Akamai. Really what they are is us saying, hey, wait a minute, we can use this platform that we already have out there doing a lot of different things to solve a lot of common problems that our customers want us to solve. So the idea is when you outsource Cloudlets to the edge, you're not writing that code in your own infrastructure, and you're outsourcing a lot of the capacity and other things that you need to maintain at your origin infrastructure. Now, so why Cloudlets for DevOps? Cloudlets offload work that you would otherwise be doing at your origin. And we allow you with Cloudlets, and I'm going to go through some examples today, to actually take logic that happens at your origin, so some decisions, things that aren't static, that require a decision to be made, and put that logic at the edge. And Cloudlets are intended for the DevOps audience. So by that, I mean they're entirely self-serviceable. And there's a number of ways you can interact with Cloudlets. They're granular, so you can control access permissions. And the way you can interact with Cloudlets, by the way, is through Luna. You can use APIs. Cloudlets are an API-first architecture, which means we build Cloudlet products, we build an API for that Cloudlet product, and then we build Luna to use the API. And we expose that same API that Luna uses to our customers. So anything you can do in Luna, you can always do with an API. And we have our new Akamai CLI that also starting to support Cloudlets, and we'll talk about that in a little moment. So what I want to do for the next little while is go through a few use cases that I've seen common with our customers. Talk about problems that our customers have had with Cloudlets, and then how they've used Cloudlets to solve those problems, and then use that, also use those problems as a way to show you how you can automate and integrate Cloudlets into your existing workflow or into your existing environment. So the first use case is around redirects. Now let's give everyone a hand stretch. How many people here have redirects in their application? Yeah, I thought so. So redirects are pretty simple at its native form, right? It's you want to get to this URL, and I'm going to send you to that URL. Now, when I started Akamai 3 years ago, I was actually surprised the number of customers I work with that actually have real problems with redirects. And the problems are a couple of things. First, they build up a very large database of redirects, because a lot of websites have been around for over 10 years. And in that 10 years, microsites come and go, marketing campaigns come and go, and you end up with a database of many hundred, sometimes several thousand redirects. And managing those redirects can be really problematic. Another thing often that we hear is redirects need some logic, and they have to be done at origin. And the other problem I hear from our customers is business wants the redirects, and the admin, the DevOps folks, go in and configure the redirects. And it's not a good use of our time to be inputting URL redirects into whatever our web server application or our load balancer is. So people want to outsource this. So I want to show you a use case I actually had with one of our customers, one of my customers. So I use webpage test, webpagetest.org. It's a great tool to analyze website performance. And it outputs a waterfall. And the waterfall shows each object that's called from a web page and how long the object took to load. This particular customer of mine is a global set of brands. They have about 10 different brands. And they have 30 geographic specific websites. So they have site.ca for Canada, site.mx for Mexico, and et cetera. And they use a logic when you go to site.com to find out where your geo is and then redirect you to the appropriate location. So I went to webpage test. I saw this. I saw in that second line there was a 1.4 second delay in requests. Now, how many people spend lots of time shaving hundreds of milliseconds off their site's performance time? This was adding 1.4 seconds to the top. So we did a little bit of analysis, and what we found, this was done from London, England, by the way. So I was making a request from webpage test in London, England, to an Akamai Edge server in London, England. That Edge server didn't have the redirect in cache because there's a lot of logic that it needed to do. So it would send the request to the customer's origin in Montreal, Canada. The customer's origin in Montreal, Canada would say, OK, I'm going to do a redirect, but I need to check out the IP address that request came from. And they subscribed to a service in California. So the request would go to California, and California would say, oh, I know that IP address. It's located in Great Britain. Send that data back to Montreal. Montreal would say, OK, I'm going to direct you to site.co.uk. Send it back to our Edge server in London, which would send it back to the user. So you can see the drastic inefficiencies that this was causing. So I want to take you through actually a real-life example and show you the discovery process we went through to get a better workflow. So initially, when I talked to the customer about this, it was pretty obvious that they needed to outsource redirects to the edge. It makes sense, right? Have that edge server receiving the request, have that logic, and make the redirect. So they said, we want to do it in Property Manager. And a lot of the Akamai CDN products come with the ability to sense geographic locations. So they said, we want to do it in Property Manager. I said, we have an edge redirector cloud that you should probably look at. And they said, no, let's do it in Property Manager. So this is a mock-up of what they ended up doing in Property Manager. This had to do a redirect that said, if user location is Mexico, then redirect to .mx. And then if it's Canada, .ca. If it's the UK, et cetera, et cetera. And we found out was with 30 different geographies and 10 different brand-specific sites, all those variations and permutations made scaling this and managing this unfeasible. So then we said, OK, great. Let's look at a cloudlet. So cloudlets, just so you know, operate separately from Property Manager. So cloudlets are their own part, their own section of Luna, and that gives them a separate configuration as well. So we have a Cloudlet Policy Manager. The Cloudlet Policy Manager, by the way, is where you configure your redirect and redirect logic. And then in Property Manager, on the default rule, we add a behavior for the Edge Redirector Cloudlet. And the policy has a name, and I just put my policy name here. So this is my policy is LW_redirect. And now my redirects from my Cloudlet policy, once this configures in production, are pushed through into this particular configuration. And now all these redirects are active on my site. So we created a Cloudlet policy to have that geographic logic. And it looked like this. If country is Canada, redirect to site1.ca. Now, you're probably sitting there saying, great, Les, but that kind of looks like what we just did in Property Manager, right? There's a number of reasons why this customer ended up choosing a cloudlet, and I think this adds a lot of value. First off, the redirects in cloudlets are separate from Property Manager. So if you're going to configure redirects in Property Manager, you need to push a different version of your entire CDN configuration out for every single redirect you end up implementing. Cloudlets operate separately, so you can create redirects, push your Cloudlet policies out as a separate configuration without the risk and change control that goes in to having a production push for your main property go out into production. The other thing that's really cool is you can control what users have access to individual Cloudlet policies. So if you have business users that have or marketing users who frequently request redirects, you can give them access to this interface that's designed to actually be simple at the beginning and allow them to just configure their own redirects, push the Cloudlet policy for their redirects to production without giving them access to Property Manager or Kona or anything else that you don't want them monkeying with. The main flexibility that comes with Cloudlets is how you can operate with the data. So in reality, with my customer's situation, 10 different sites, 30 different geography combinations, you don't want to go in and add an extra line here for every single property. This is where the DevOps agility that comes with Cloudlets really gets exciting. So one thing you can do, I'm going to show you a number of ways to do this, is you can actually upload and download this data in CSV format. So I'm just going to click Download Rules here. And there you go. I've downloaded a CSV file. So I'm going to open that. I'm going to open it. It's going to open in Excel, I think. And I'm just going to use Excel as a good way of displaying it. But really, we can upload it, use this in any kind of text editor. So, and now it actually gave me my policy in a pragmatic format. Now, there's documentation for each Cloudlet that shows you all the options and permutations that we can put here for a CSV format. But I'm just going to go ahead and add a redirect rule here just to show you how easy it can be. So I'm just going to delete these two, and I'm going to add a redirect rule for anyone here from a country other than Canada and the US? No? Okay, I'll choose Sorry? Sweden? Okay. And what's the domain suffix for Sweden? SE? Perfect. So there we go. So they're from Sweden, and I think SE is the suffix, so I'm going to change that. So there you go. I built a CSV file here that looks for the rule name Sweden. If the country is connecting to SE, redirect them to site1.se. I'm going to be lazy. I'm going to save this in my downloads folder. I'm going to go to the Cloudlet policy. I'm going to go upload rules, choose file. I'm going to go to downloads. I'm now uploading the file, and there we go. I now have a redirect for Sweden. So the advantage here is you can pragmatically write a script to quickly generate a CSV file and upload a very complex set of redirects. And you can also have this uploaded through an API. So your application can spit out a whole bunch of redirects as they're needed, upload them via an API, and Akamai can start redirecting them. Also, let's talk about that API. So there's a fully featured API for Cloudlets. And I think I mentioned at the beginning that Cloudlets is what we call an API-first architecture. And it's where any new product we put together at Akamai is going. But by that, I mean we develop the product, and the front end to that product is actually an API. And Luna uses the same API that we expose to our customers. So if you're going to want to use a Cloudlet API, developer.akamai.com is the site you want to remember. At the top, we click API. This is where we list all of our open APIs. So every product has, or almost every product has an API. And we have fairly in-depth documentation for that. So we have one API that actually supports all of our different Cloudlets. So I just search for Cloudlet API. And then at the top, I have different documentation. Where you're probably going to want to start is the Resources tab. And I think I clicked it. There we go. And it gives me an example of each API endpoint by function. So if we want to get a policy, create a policy, shows me I'm going to go ahead and post to a specific URL. And let's go ahead and use a create a policy as an example. It gives me an example of what the request should look like, what parameters I can include in the request, an example of each one, the response, and then the steps I need to take. So we've given you a very verbose documentation to be able to easily take this API and integrate into your application. We also have the Akamai CLI, which is basically a command tool that lets you do pragmatic calls more easily. We don't have a module yet for this edge redirector, but I'm going to show you later when we go into visitor prioritization. Another cool thing about the edge redirector, I talked to you about how we have these policies and business users can go and edit these policies. Let me show you what it looks like to add a rule. By default, we have this very simplistic view. We just give the rule a name, say what's your source URL, what's your redirect URL, and is it a 301 or a 302 redirect, and click save. And this is a more advanced view where you can input data and look basically at anything we know about the user. So you can look at the query string, anything in the header, where they're coming from, if they have certain cookies, and use that as logic. But for a business user, they're going to start off with a basic view and just have that. Now, I showed you an example of how to implement a cloudlet where I'm just pulling the edge redirector into my default rule. So that way, I've connected my policy I'm working with in the cloudlet to my CDN configuration. But we can be a lot more agile here. So if I want to go ahead and create a new rule here, I'm just going to go add rule. I'm going to go blank rule. Let's call it edge. Whoops. And I can choose a path. So I want to go say if path is /marketing, then implement the edge redirector cloudlet. And I'm going to put the policy name in there. So now I can give the business user a policy and only allow them to do redirects on any URL that starts in /marketing. So I can really be granular with my user permission to certain cloudlet policies, and then granular about how those policies are able to inject redirects into my application. So this is an example of how we're solving real business problems. I want to go forward and just give you a few more use cases that I've seen for the edge redirector cloudlet. There we go. So different ways cloudlets can be used. They can be used to offload large redirect databases. That's pretty simple. Can apply cookie logic to redirect. So if the user comes in with a preferred user cookie, we can go ahead and redirect them to somewhere different. We can direct a user based on their device. So if you have a mobile site, we can direct users based on geography, as we've seen. And there's a whole bunch of other options that are available to end users. I want to go forward and just review some of the different ways that we can interact with users. First way we can interact is actually with the API. So you can have your API actually come into Akamai and make requests. Second way we can interact is via the Luna portal. I think everyone's familiar with that. Third way is via CSV file. We saw that. And the fourth way we're going to talk about in the next example is with the Akamai CLI. And the next example we're going to talk about helps you manage traffic surges. So we all cache static files at the edge, and that gives you scalability. It gives you performance. But there's inevitably on every website these days a certain amount of dynamic traffic that has to go back to your origin. Big problem that certain segments of our customers have are flash crowds. So a flash crowd can be generated by a Cyber Monday sale, a Rihanna tweet, or a game day and a big game about to start and start streaming. So spikes at origin can cause rolling outages, they can cause brownouts, can cause your customers to get frustrated because things are slow, can cause mid-term, long-term site outages, and all that has negative business aspects. So we don't want to have too much load coming to origin so origin starts to fall over. And the best case to manage spikes at origin is to scale your origin. So your origin instantly has more capacity. Just to show of hands, my interest, how many people here can scale their origin capacity in 2 minutes? Oh, good. How about 5? 15? OK, so some of us can scale. Some of us can't. And sometimes when the flash crowd comes, even 2 minutes isn't necessarily scalable enough. So visitor prioritization is basically like a proxy that sits in between the load and your backend and proxies that load until your backend is able to scale. So here's how it works. We define privileged users, and those privileged users come through right to the backend application all the time. Under normal circumstances, regular visitors come through as well. When there's a high load situation, like a flash crowd, maybe you get a big tweet or something like that, then we take prioritized users and let them continue to go to your backend application. And the prioritized users can be identified by a cookie or anything we know about the request. So maybe a user has more than $200 in their shopping cart. Maybe they have the preferred user cookie. Visitors get a different experience, though. Visitors are put into this, a waiting room. Now, we give you this sample waiting room out of the box, but you can brand this to include your own logo, to include games, to include videos, to include your ad, to really give a user a branded experience. And the users sit in this waiting room until capacity or origin frees up. To go a little more granularly, here's how it works. So we define users, and we define users in groups. And those groups are defined by anything we know about the user. So again, they could have a cookie that tells you they're a preferred customer. They could be from a certain geography, so maybe you want to let US users through first and put people from Sweden in the waiting room for a long time. Maybe you want to say, hey, they're a mobile device. I know mobile devices are more likely to abandon my site because they're in a waiting room, so I'm just going to let them be. So whatever you do, you define users in groups. In this case, I have 3 groups, group 1, 2, and 3. And I define that 10% of users in group 3 go to the waiting room, all the way to 80% of the users in group 1 go to the waiting room. So the way that works is when 10 users in group 1 come in, 2 of them go right through to your back end, and 8 of them go into the waiting room. And they stay there for a certain amount of time. Our default's 30 seconds, but you can specify whatever amount of time you want. And after the 30 seconds, they have, again, 1 in 5 or 2 in 8 chance of going through to the origin or going back into your waiting room. So you end up having this buffer of users that's controlled by what percentage of users need to end up in your waiting room. And that allows your origin to be able to breathe, to have enough capacity to flow through. And then we take the users that really matter to you and make sure they get the best possible experience. So I want to go talk about sort of our approach to DevOps and dealing with these situations. So you can configure and manage anything in Luna. We all know that. But our vision is you're going to probably want to set up something like visitor prioritization and define those groups 1, 2, and 3 in Luna, because those are one-time tasks. And any one-time task, you're not going to want to take the time to figure out how to use the API to do. You may, but it's probably not likely. But throttling users, like saying, now I need group 1, 40% of users in the waiting room. Now I need 70% of users in the waiting room. Now I'm going to throttle it back. That type of task is very operational. And that's where we see there being a lot of opportunity for automation. So you can automate this by using the same API we went through before. Or you can use the Akamai CLI. How many people here have learned about the Akamai CLI over the last few days? Excellent. So I'm going to show you an example of how I can use the Akamai CLI to actually go ahead and modify how many users go through to the room. So I have a command line here, and I've actually already installed the Akamai CLI. If you want to install the Akamai CLI, you can go to developer.akamai.com/devops, follow links on the CLI. And we have a module called visitor prioritization. We actually call it VP for short because visitor prioritization is a very long term to be typing on the command line. And I'm just going to go -help, and it's going to give me the options that I can choose from the command line. I'm not going to run my upgrade now. So I can activate new policies, and I can throttle users. But we've designed the CLI to have those functions that you're going to want to automate. So we think that you're going to want to automate different policies and throttle different policies. So if I go Akamai VP, throttle, and I have a policy already configured. And I'm going to change the percent to 75. So I'm going to put 75% of my users in the waiting room. And there's a rule. So I have a group of users called gold users. So my gold users maybe look at for a specific cookie or a specific parameter that defines them as golden users. Although I probably don't want to put 75% of my golden users in the waiting room anyways. And I'm going to activate in the production network. And all these parameters are discoverable by clicking Akamai, typing Akamai space VP space help. And if I type Akamai space VP space throttle -help, I'd see all the options that are available for the policy. So it's going to ask me to confirm. I'm going to hit yes. And now what the CLI is doing is actually making API calls from my terminal. And it's going out to Akamai. It's activating a new policy version. It's called the version 13. And it's pushed it out to the production. What's really cool is these changes push in 30 seconds. So in 30 seconds, our 240,000 servers around the globe are now going to put 75% of the users that I've defined by the golden rule in my waiting room. This allows you to very easily introduce automation into whatever systems you have. So maybe you have DPM, digital performance management software, that goes and says, hey, wait a minute, my users are getting a slow response. I should start buffering some because my backend's is too heavily loaded. Maybe you have performance monitoring systems that say, hey, wait a minute, CPU usage on our database cluster is at 95%. Latency is at increased 200%. I need to now go throttle. And just by calling a simple command, you can go ahead and do that. We have a really nice demo at the performance and scalability booth where one of our architects, Lukas in Poland, built some actual algorithm that looks at the load of his origin infrastructure, and as the load starts to scale, it automatically makes API calls to Akamai to have visitor prioritization start throttling the users. This is real powerful stuff that solve real problems for many sites. I'm just going to go back into presenter mode here and talk about just some use cases. So retail is a common use case for having flash crowds. We also find it with broadcasters a lot. So if a US television network is broadcasting the Monday Night Football game that starts at 7 p.m., they have Akamai to scale the stream, but everyone goes to log in with their TV subscription between 6:58 and 7:01 p.m. So visitor prioritization can throttle those authentication requests. Banks have peaks around tax and investment season, charities with events, and I've had this one. If you're rolling in a course, I bet you didn't for Akamai University, but if you're rolling in a university course and registration opens at 9 a.m. on a certain day, I remember 20 years ago, everyone would go and hit enter at the same time, and none of us would succeed. So these are use cases for visitor prioritization. One more that I want to talk to you about is releasing new software. So our businesses today, and this is a trend I see a lot, want to move to market faster. They want to be more agile. So we need to, in technology, keep up with what marketing wants us to do. And I think most of you would agree with me, it takes considerably more work to code new applications, to build infrastructure, than it does to come up with the idea. And so we get pushed to push things to market faster and to get things out quicker. But then there's the risk whenever you're pushing new things out and you don't do proper testing, that you can have problems. And you don't want to introduce buggy code that causes your site to come down. So we've designed a cloudlet called Phase Release Cloudlet, and it does canary testing. So it does incremental rollouts. Here's how it works. So we start with our origin on the right-hand side. We call it origin A, and 100% of our users, 100% of our traffic from Akamai goes to origin A. And we introduce a new origin. In this case, demonstrated as a second origin that we call origin B. But in reality, it can be the same origin, same cluster, and just a different directory that has different code. And we define a second type of user. I'm going to call it the blue users. And we can define users, again, about anything we know about the user. And then we say, OK, I'm going to send 5% of my orange users. So maybe my orange, and we'll talk about how we define users in a sec. I'm going to send 5% of those users to my alternate origin. And we maintain persistence by putting cookies in. So those same orange users, the same 5%, will always go to origin B. And then you can use a product like mPulse to monitor their experience. Or you can monitor your own logs for errors, just to validate that your code's working. If there's a problem, you quickly fail them back to origin A, and in 30 seconds, just like you saw with visitor prioritization, we flip the switch back to origin A. So you can introduce new code quicker and be able to monitor it on a small percentage of your users and really minimize the impact with a really, really fast failback plan. But let's say your code does increase. Your code release does go well, so I'm sure it does most of the time. So we eventually add more and more users to go to origin B to the point where 100% of the users are at your alternate origin. Now I want to show you, via PowerPoint this time, how we create a policy and how that works. So, and it's really just 4 steps. Cloudlets are really designed to be easy. So this is our Cloudlet policy manager. I basically created a button to create a new policy. I tell it I want to create a phase release policy and give it a name. Pretty simple. Next thing, now I'm going to go into property manager and add a behavior, much like I did with the edge redirector. So I give it the policy a name. So I add the behavior. I tell it what policy name I have. So I connect my Cloudlet into my CDN configuration. And then what you need to do, because we have different origins in the phase release Cloudlet, you need to define each origin. So at the top where it says defined as, we give it a name. So call it origin 2. And then behavior is the same behavior used to define your general origin. So we have to define each origin, we give it a name, and we give it a behavior to tell Akamai where the origin is. The last step is back in the Cloudlet policy manager, we define the logic. So the phase release doesn't have to apply to your whole site. I can specify that it goes to only a specific subset of my URL. So it can go to a specific path where I'm only releasing the new code. Then we say, OK, I'm going to send contents to its particular origin name, which I defined in my last step. And you say, I want to send, in this case, 50% of my traffic to my alternate origin. You can slide this back and forth. What's really neat is the possibilities we have here. So this box here, the if condition, we can throw a whole bunch of conditions. So you can put a cookie condition. So if you have users who never buy anything from your site, and you put a special cookie in them, you can give those users the I want to test on these people cookie, and phase release will pick up that and send those users to the alternate origin. You can look for device characterization. So again, maybe you don't want to test on mobile devices. You can add a second condition by clicking the plus to say, if URL path is application 3 and device is not mobile, then go ahead and do this. You can look at the query string. You could look at anything from the content header. So maybe if the refer header is coming from a specific site, you don't want to test on them, and that's OK. You can also do user location. So maybe you only want to test users within continental US. So this is how you put a lot of logic that your origin would have to do. And this applies for every cloudlet, and put it into Akamai. And just some tips and ways that we see phase release cloudlet being used with our customers. And this, along with the Edge redirector, are two of our most popular cloudlets. A lot of times you see it integrated as part of your CI/CD, or your continual integration, continual deployment workflow. So you can have your deployment software like Chef, Puppet, or Jenkins control phase release as part of your code release. So you're releasing new code. You already have your policies and everything defined. And you can actually have Jenkins go ahead and push it to 5% of your users. You can have monitoring software automatically go and fail back when specific policies come into play, and you realize that there's a need to fail over. And integration for this is available via our API today, and we are going to be adding it into the Akamai CLI as well as an additional module. And again, our approach is really that you're probably going to want to be able to, with the CLI, change which policy and change how many users are throttled to which origin fairly quickly and fairly agile, in a very agile manner. Something like defining your origins in your property or defining each rule, that's kind of the kind of criteria you set up once, and you don't need to automate. So when we're looking at introducing automation, we're always looking for the specific areas where there's the most value of integration and the most value of automation. Any questions so far? I'll just take a break and ask some questions. Yep. Sorry, can you just come to the front maybe or speak? Sorry. Yeah, you can come up. It's OK.
So at Lowe's, we use Edge redirector pretty heavily.
Mm-hmm.
Our biggest request from our business team is formatting CSV files and Excel. So any kind of formatting parameters that you pass into the CLI, people control with the formatting of CDS and Excel file from upload and download.
Got it. So I think the request is how can we format the CSV files? So CLI today doesn't support the Edge redirector cloudlet. The CLI is a new product, by the way. It's about 3 months old. Visitor prioritization was our first cloudlet module. I know Edge redirector is such a natural use case for the CLI, and our product team knows that, and it is on the roadmap. So it's going to happen. I don't have an idea of when. Now, in terms of formatting, the CSV files come out in one specific format. But if you go to the Luna and search for Edge redirector documentation, you can actually find out all the permutations you can use within the Edge redirector cloudlet. What I personally do is I configure it in Luna, then download a CSV file and find out what the parameters were. That's just my way of doing it. Any other questions? Yep.
Does CLI yet support
Segmentation.
segmentation cloudlet?
No. So it actually only supports the visitor prioritization cloudlet today. The segmentation cloudlet is kind of like a cousin to phase release. They're very similar. The segmentation is more for marketing purposes, like A/B testing. This is more for incremental code rollout. Both. Nice. That's good. So I don't know about the segmentation cloud as much because it's less geared towards DevOps. We may down the road, especially if we're doing phase release. But phase release is one of Edge redirector. I think is our next priority for the CLI, and I can only expect the phase release would be after that. Yep.
Are there features that are exposed to phase release that aren't available in the application load balancer?
Yeah, so the phase release is more intended for automating failback. So the application load balancer, it'll let you fail over and let you fail back. It's not designed to do this from a DevOps perspective for continual deployment. So I think that the biggest difference is how you interact with the cloudlets. And the application load balancer requires you to set up different data centers and set up load thresholds for those data centers. So it's more intended for balancing traffic between different data sets and different geographies. Phase release is intended, your origins can be in different data sets. It could be a load balancing mechanism, but it's not intended to balance load as equally. Anything else? Any other questions? Yeah.
If you want to download across data centers, but you also want to do generic deployments, how would you
Good question. So before the application load balancer, the way you would orchestrate that is to point phased release to a GTM property and have our GTM DNS service do the load balancing. What I recommend for phased releases that you continue to do that. The big advantage that the application load balancer has over anything that we've done in GTM in the past is to be able to maintain session persistence at layer 7. And phased release will do that with the persistence. Any other questions? So maybe just take a few moments to go over a few of the other cloudlets, and I'll do it at a very, very high level. So there's the API prioritization cloudlet, and that's very much like visitor prioritization, but for APIs. So if you have an SPA or a mobile application, it's a good use case. The request control cloudlet is kind of like, I don't want to say a mini WAF, it's kind of like a mini network control list, so you can block IP addresses based on geo or based on anything in the request. So you can block requests based on anything we see from the user. The forward rewrite cloudlet is kind of neat. You can have, if you have a very long URL that your CMS spits out, but you want users to be able to type in like akamai.com/edge and go to a much longer redirect, we can have one SEO-friendly URL from edge to user and have the edge go back and pull a very complex URL from your origin infrastructure. So this is a way to kind of mask URLs and make them much more user-friendly. And then there's audience segmentation. So audience segmentation is very, very similar to phased release, except it's designed to provide marketing a view of A/B testing to test conversion rates. So if you're putting a new website out and you want to test, hey, does this improve conversions or does it really sink conversions? You can send 10% of your traffic to a different site. And then our newest cloudlet, or actually our second newest cloudlet, is input validation. What input validation allows you to do is validate form data at the edge. And you can do that through JavaScript, and most sites commonly do it through JavaScript today. What form validation does, it does it at the edge in a way that the user can't tamper with it. And our audience segmentation cloudlet was released just a few months ago, actually at the beginning of summer. And the audience segmentation cloudlet allows you to geographically load balance traffic between data centers. And it has some really pretty neat logic. Like it'll actually detect the closest data center to a user, allow you to balance that, stay within load thresholds, and also put cookies in place to maintain persistence at the layer 7 level. So the good news about cloudlets is they're very self-serviceable, and they're also very easy to get. So you can, of course, talk to your account team about getting a cloudlet. You can also go to the Akamai marketplace and try a cloudlet out for free for 60 days. And if you like it, great. If you don't like it, then you just stop using it. And that's available in Luna just by clicking Marketplace at the top. Any other questions that have come up? No? Great. I want to thank you very much for coming out to Edge and for your time. I'll be around for the next little while if you have any questions. Otherwise, please enjoy our closing keynote and have a good trip home and a good weekend. Thank you, everyone.